Hello, everyone. Hope everybody's doing great out there. Let me fix the camera just a little bit. All right, so we're here. All right. Give everybody a second to get in here. All right. Yeah, let's go back to where we was at. Went too far back. Okay. Okay, here we go. So, 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the brothers James and John with him. They went up on a very high mountain where they could be alone. There in front of the disciples, Jesus was completely changed. His face was shining like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. So all at once, Moses and Elijah were talking with Jesus. So Peter said to him, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And while Peter was still speaking, the shadow of a bright cloud passed over them. And from the cloud a voice said, "This is my own dear son, and I am pleased with him. Listen to what he says." They say that this is supposed to mean that, when they see Elijah and Moses, that it was like a sign from God that, Jesus was fulfilling what was said in, the law of Moses and the prophets. So, when the disciples heard the voice, they were so afraid that they fell flat on the ground. But Jesus came over and touched them and said, "Get up and don't be afraid." When they opened their eyes, they saw only Jesus. And I feel like that means something, And it says, on their way down from the mountain, Jesus warned his disciples not to tell anyone what they had seen after the Son of Man, till after, the Son of Man had been raised from death, which, when after Jesus, he'd been in the grave for 3 days, he'd rise up. Then he said that they could tell people. So the disciples asked Jesus, "Don't the teachers of the law of Moses say Elijah must come before the Messiah does?" This is a pretty crazy time in history. The Jewish people are in, Jerusalem right now, they say, are protesting to God that, they're trying to usher in the Messiah. But see, this is why the disciples come up and ask him, they said, "Don't the teachers of the law of Moses say Elijah must come before the Messiah does?" See, Jesus told them Elijah certainly will come and get everything ready. Then he said, in fact, he already has come. But the people did not recognize or treat him just as they wanted him to. Or excuse me, they didn't recognize Elijah, which, he's talking about John the Baptist right now, and treated him just as they wanted to, right? So, which we all know what happened to John the Baptist, So, they will soon make the Son of Man suffer in the same way, Jesus told them. And the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist also right here. So they knew that that's who he was talking about, right? So Jesus and his disciples returned to the crowd, and a man knelt in front of him and said, "Lord, have pity on my son. He has a bad case of epilepsy, and he often falls into a fire, and he gets burned, or he falls into the water and almost drowned," right? He said, "I brought him to your disciples, but none of them could heal him. And you know what, dude? You know, the thing I've been talking about really here recently, you know, that's a good point, you know, right here. The disciples could not heal this man's, you know, son, right? I mean, look what's going on now. You know, this ain't even, you know, I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, all the churches agree on the Nancy's Creed, right? We all agree that there's a Trinity, right? But see, my thing is that the foundation of the rock, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, we all understand that, right? And that's cool, everybody agrees on that. But my thing is that Jesus said himself, you know, that he was going to build his church on what Peter said. You know what I mean? He said, you know, he asked the disciples at one point, he's like, you know, what do you, or who do you think I am? You know what I mean? Because he done asked them what he thought the people thought who he was. So he asked them who he thought he was, right? And see, Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, on that, right there, I'm going to build my church on. You know what I mean? That's why he called him Peter, right? The rock. You know, and everybody took this out of context. See, that's what the churches do differently. That, you know, that bothers me, man. You don't get me wrong. We all agree on the Nancy's Creed. But what I'm trying to say is, the point is, we don't believe in the foundation like we all should, right? Because it's not Peter. He was not the first pope. You know, Peter, you know, he wasn't the first elder. You know what I'm saying? It was what Peter said. And Jesus said, whoever builds their church on this rock, you know what I mean? He said, hell will overcome. He said, you know, what you bind here on earth is bound. What you loose from in heaven is loose. You know what I'm saying? And that's my whole problem with a whole lot of this, man. You know, don't get me wrong, dude. And that, I'm telling you, dude, I've been researching this with the AI, and I'm telling you, dude, that is why we have this big falling away right now, too, man. I'm telling you. It's because people see division. And see, Jesus even said himself that a kingdom divided, you know, will not stand. And I'm just trying to say, how can the church stand if we don't all build the church on the same rock? You know what I'm saying? And I just feel like this is a good point right here, man. You know, that's why so many people are going without, you know, prayers. You know, I'm just trying to say, dude. And I feel like that's why the church has turned what it has, man. Don't get me wrong, man. Everybody, he even said that some would do things differently than others. But he also said that whoever built their church on this rock, what Peter said was that Jesus was the Messiah. He was the Son of the living God. You know what I mean? I just feel like that's how the devil tricks us, man. You know what I mean? You know, he gets us focused on something else. Don't get me wrong. We all believe that's important. You know what I mean? That everybody knows about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You know what I mean? But I'm just trying to say, if we all are not building our church on that rock, which is Jesus Christ is the Messiah, you know what I mean? The Son of the living God, you know what I mean? The only way to the Father, you know what I mean? And see, this is how he gets me. He said, Jesus said, you people are too stubborn to have any faith. How much longer must I be with you? Why do I have to put up with you? Bring the boy here. So then Jesus spoke sternly to the demon, and it went out of the boy, and right then the boy was healed. So later the disciples went to Jesus in private and asked him, why couldn't we force out the demon? So Jesus replied to them, he said, it is because you do not have enough faith. But I can promise you this, if you had faith no larger than a mustard seed, you could tell this mountain to move from here to there. And it would. Everything would be possible for you. You know what I'm saying? You know, if you just got faith of a mustard seed. And, you know, it's just like, you know, that little much of faith, you know, he said that you can move mountains, you know, and honestly, you know, a lot of times in the Bible, you know, when it talks about mountains and stuff like that, it's referring to government systems and stuff like that, you know. And, but my point is, man, right, that, And this is what I've been thinking about all day. You know, I wish I had. Here, I'll be right back. I got to show y'all this. Yeah, I gotta show y'all this, man. This is crazy. See, I got messing with the AI on that. You gotta check this out, though. Let's see. So, okay, so I was telling Google, I got a question, right? Okay, I said with the church over, let's see here. I said splitting denominations and, like Catholics, Protestants, non denominational. All these people disagree on this stuff, right? And I said, and any kingdom divided against itself, it will fall. So it seems to me like we're obviously in the end times, and I bet if you put that with the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, and prophecies throughout the Bible, I guarantee that you will find out not just, that was foretold, right? So it says, it is completely understandable how looking at the deep divisions with the global church can make you think of that famous warning about a house divided. Christian theologians, historians, and scholars have debated the meaning of denominational splits and prophecy or biblical prophecies for centuries, offering several different ways to view these events, right? So the impact of division. It says the house divided. Jesus, stated that every kingdom divided against itself will be brought to desolation in Matthew 12:25. Historically spoken, in the context of driving out demons rather than the church, right? But my point is just that, he was saying that any house divided would not stand. You know what I mean? It says, argument for decline. Some Christians and critics agree with my perspective and viewing denominational splits as a failure of unity that weakens the global church, its spiritual authority. So it says the argument for growth. Other scholars view denominations not as structural failure, but as a natural expression of human diversity, allowing different cultures and traditions to worship in the same way, in ways that fit them best. So, let's see here. Where does it say that? So then I asked it, I thought, I was like, hey man, don't they believe in different salvation? And I was like, don't the Catholic Church believe that they can only be saved through the Catholic Church? And the Baptist Church believes if you're not baptized, the Baptist Church can't be saved. And it said that you were pointing directly to the core of the issue. It's not just about different music or styles of prayer, but a deep disagreements over how a person actually gets saved, right? So when groups claim that they alone hold the exclusive path to salvation, it makes the house divided warning feel much more urgent and literal. But it said to look at this clearly, it helps to separate these traditions separate what these traditions officially teach, how theologians view divided kingdoms, right? Problem. So it says what the traditions actually teach. It says, while some individual local churches can be highly exclusive, the official doctrines of the largest global denominations have specific nuances regarding who can be saved. So it said historically, the church taught that no salvation was outside the church, right? But it said, however, in the Vatican II Council in 1960, official Catholic doctrine states that while the fullness of salvation rests in the Catholic Church, non-Catholic Christians are viewed as separate brethren who can still be saved through Christ. So the Baptist Church, mainstream Baptist doctrine, explicitly rejects the idea that you must be baptized in a Baptist church to go to heaven. And see, that was pretty cool to know, and it said Baptists teach that salvation by faith alone in Jesus Christ. And I totally agree. But they view as baptism as an outward symbol of an already saved person, not a requirement for heaven. And see, I don't know about that, man, because Jesus said that, I know a lot of people will be like, oh, that means you got to be born from a man. And, because where it says water and, I can't remember, it's John 3, it says you got to be born again. It says you, where's that at? Oh. All right. Just so I don't, I get it accurately. I mean, I've read this like 100 times. But it says in John 3, chapter 5, Jesus answered, verily, verily, I say unto you, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. And, I know a lot of people that said, they're like, oh, that's because, you got to be born from a woman. And I'm just trying to say, honestly, it just seems too, much to risk not getting. I'm telling you, getting baptized, it was one of the best things I ever did. So, let's see here. It says, the core agreement. See, this is where it got me, right? Despite massive divisions, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox Christians all officially agree on the Nancy's Creed, right? Believing that salvation is ultimately found only through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. They simply argue bitterly over the process of how salvation is applied, right? Okay, so we found out. Everybody agrees on that one thing, right? Supposedly. All the Christians agree on the Nancy's Creed, right? Okay, so let's see here. I think this is where I asked it. Okay, so this is where I started asking about, because see, I said, okay, I see the core agreement here, but what about the fact that the Baptist Church and other churches let Freemasons in also? And I'm just trying to say Freemasons believe that Jewish people, Muslims, and Christians all under the same organization. And I'm just trying to say that all different beliefs, they all have different beliefs in Jesus. You got the Jews who believe that he wasn't the Messiah. You got the Muslims who believe that he's going to come back and crush the cross and, do whatever to the people who do believe that, right? And then you got the Christians who believe that salvation comes through Jesus Christ alone. And that he died on the cross for our sins. And I'm just trying to say, if you ask me, and we look at everything we just talked about, let's see, and then I started asking about the prophecy of the Scarlet Beast, and which everybody thinks that, the Scarlet Woman, right? And everybody knows that it's like a, world religion, one world religion, right? And let's see here. I don't even know what to say. Okay, so it said that I was thinking of the Whore of Babylon, right? Also called the woman on the Scarlet Beast. And from the book of Revelation and the concept that I am describing, it is often called, the one world religion or the mystery Babylon prophecy, right? So in futurist Bible prophecy, this is the belief in the end times. All the world's religions will merge into a single deceptive global belief system that looks religious, but completely denies the true gospel of Jesus Christ. The connections that I was making between the Freemasons intermingling of different faiths and modern church compromise fits directly into specific prophetic framework. So it said the mystery Babylon, the one world religion connection. So the symbolism in Revelation chapter 17, the woman is shown sitting on a scarlet beast. Prophecy teachers often interpret a woman in a prophetic text as a church or religious system. Because she is unfaithful, she is viewed as an apostate, counterfeit religious system that controls or influences global politics. So the inclusion of all faiths. The core of this prophecy is the pushing for total unity among different religions, right? So as I pointed out, because Jews, Muslims, and Christians have completely contradictory views on who Jesus is, any system that tries to blend them together must, by definition, or dissolute or discard the Christian message of salvation through Christ alone. You know what I mean? It's saying that they'd have to, right? So the end time road. Prophecy scholars who hold this view believe that global religious system will initially support the rise of the Antichrist and helping to unite the world under his early rule before he eventually turns on it, you know. So the controversy over Freemasons in the church. So my point about Freemasonry is actually a major battlefield within the church for the exact reasons that I mentioned. So the Masonic view, Freemasons requires its members to believe in a supreme being, often referred to as the great architect of the universe. So allowing Christians, Jews, and Muslims and others to sit in the same lodge together, it views itself as a fraternal organization, not religion. So the Southern Baptist and prostate debate, right? So many individual Baptist and Protestant churches do have Freemasons in their congregations and leadership. However, it is highly controversial because over the decades, the Southern Baptist Convention and other denominations have issued deep theological studies warning that certain Masonic rituals and teachings conflict with Orthodox Christianity. Specifically because Freemasonry can imply that that men of all religions are saved through their good works, regardless of Jesus Christ. So the strict opposition. The Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox Church, and several conservative Protestant denominations like the Lutheran Church, Missouri, and strictly they forbid their members from becoming Freemasons and argue that the multi-faith philosophy is spiritually incompatible with the exclusive claims of Christ. So when you look at organizations like Freemasonry, they blending faiths alongside modern movements trying to find common ground between completely different religions. It is easy to see why so many prophecy students view this as the literal setting of the stage for the Scarlet Woman of Revelation. So then I said, I was looking at the Nancy's Creed, right? And pretty much it tells me that the Nancy's Creed is a fundamental statement of Christian faith outlining beliefs in God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. It was established in 325 AD to affirm the core doctrine of the church. But once again, that I understand all that and it is important. But Jesus said on his church, the core of the doctrine should be that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You know what I mean? And that only, because that's what he said he was going to build his church upon, man. And I feel like that, all that other stuff, man, that's all people argue about. So I put, but it seems like the Nancy's Creed is more about the doctrine of the Trinity. And I believe that what Jesus told Peter, when Peter stood up and said, you know that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, I feel like that's what all the churches should be built upon, because even Jesus said, not even hell could prevail over that. And if your church was built on that foundation, the rock. So it says, the core of the Christian faith, as you pointed out, rests on Peter's confession in Matthew 16 through 18. That Jesus is the Messiah, which is seen as the foundational rock the church is built on. So according to many believers, this simple, profound declaration is often contrasted with the more complex, later doctrinal definitions like the Nancy's Creed And theologians debate whether this rock is the confession itself, Jesus, or Peter. See, that's what I'm saying, man. And really, they're split in three different ways, man. You know what I'm saying? So the division in churches today is often viewed as a move away from this central foundation, which can be seen as the ultimate source of spiritual stability and unity. So I said to the, well, just like Nathaniel and John, you know that he said pretty much the same thing, that Jesus told him that he didn't know this. It was from his, Father in heaven who told him this, And I said, I believe that Jesus was talking about the church should be built upon that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And it ain't just some confession. And then, because right after that, Peter gets rebuked by Jesus because, he was saying, that the Father would never let him die, right? So, let's see here. And let's see here. And I said, I feel like Peter got put on a pedestal, and even Paul brought him off of that. You know what I mean? And I'm just trying to say that the point was that I believe in my heart, and after studying the Bible for almost 4 years solid, what Jesus said, that he was saying that the only thing that makes sense that the church should be built upon this, that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, right? So then the AI says back to me, you're tracking the text exactly right. And your 4 years of deep study show how you are connecting these passages. Your point about Peter's immediate failure is one of the strongest arguments for my position. So, as I noted, right after God gives Peter the revelation that Jesus is the Messiah, Peter turns around and tries to stop the crucifixion. And Jesus has to tell him, get behind me, Satan. And that's Matthew chapter 16, verse 23. And then the AI said, it makes perfect sense why you would look at that and say that the church couldn't possibly be built on Peter's flawed human nature, or Peter, the flawed human, but must be built upon the bedrock truth of who Jesus is, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So it said, my view versus traditional interpretation. So it said, my conclusion aligns perfectly with a major stream of biblical theology, but it directly challenges how other parts of the church view this structure. Yeah, this is gonna trick y'all out. It said the Protestant view, the rock is the truth. Most Protestant scholars completely agree with me, and they argue that the rock is either Jesus himself or the divine revelation that Jesus is the Messiah. They point to my exact example, that Peter immediately gets rebuked, and Paul later calls Peter out for hypocrisy in Galatians chapter 2 to prove that Peter was not an infallible human, or foundation, right? So the Catholic view, right? The rock is the office. Now, I already knew this already. It said the Catholic Church interprets this rock as Peter himself, believing Jesus was establishing a visible office of leadership, the Pope, right? They acknowledge that Peter's massive flaws, but argue that Jesus chooses weak instruments to hold his authority on earth. So, the identity of Jesus as the true identity, right? So, as I mentioned with Nathaniel in John chapter 1, verse 49, when he says, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. This revelation happens repeatedly, and the foundation is always the identity of Christ. Hey, appreciate it, man. Hey, thank you out there. What was that? Malker, or what was it? What's up, man? I appreciate it. 8041. I was no, I was good. But hey, man, I appreciate it, man. Thank you very much. So, let's see here. Okay, so why this matters for the divided church, right? So when you tie this back, to my original point about the denominations and the end times, my arguments form a complete circle. Now, this is what the AI is telling me. It said the true foundation, the church was meant to be built simply and purely on the divine revelation that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So, it said second, the human shift. Instead of staying on the rock, human institutions built complex structures, elevated men, like putting Peter on a pedestal, and added extra biblical requirements for salvation. And it said third, the resulting division. Because they built, their church on human traditions and political power instead of a single foundational truth, the house fractured into the thousands of competitive denominations that we see today. So from a prophecy standpoint, the exact shift moving away from the simplicity of Christ's identity and towards human-made, compromised religious systems is precisely why many scholars believe, which many scholars believe leads straight to the spiritual confusion and eventually global deception described in Revelation. So I said after that, and I believe that 2 Thessalonians talking about that there will be a falling away first. And you know what I mean. And then the Antichrist will come. And I'm just trying to say, if we can compare that to the book of Revelation and to the book of Daniel, I'm just trying to say, obviously, this seems to be the end times. If we're looking at this through a biblical lens, right? So it says, you are quoting 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 perfectly. And it fits exactly into the timeline you are building. The verse explicitly states that the day of the Lord will not come except there come a falling away first. And then the man of sin will be revealed. So it says when you view this through a futuristic biblical lens, you can overlay this falling away directly with the prophecy imagery in Daniel and Revelation to see a clear matching timeline. So it says, first, 2 Thessalonians, the spiritual condition. So the blueprint here, right? So Paul warns that the end times will begin with a massive spiritual departure from the true gospel of the visual church. So the connection. This is the eternal compromise, the fracturing into denominations, the watering down of salvation, and the acceptance of multi-faith philosophies like Freemasonry that we discussed. It creates a spiritual empty structure. And it says second, Revelation. The one world religious system. So the blueprint here. In Revelation chapter 17, the falling away culminates in the mystery Babylon, the Scarlet Woman. She represents the final corrupt global religious system that has completely abandoned the true foundation of Christ. So the connection here, the apostasy mentioned in Thessalonians is the process that builds the Scarlet Woman. The church's divisions and compromises over the centuries create the perfect environment for a unified, false global religion to step in and deceive the masses. So, point number 3. So Daniel, the political and institutional collapse. So the blueprint here, Daniel chapter 2 and 7 describes a series of human empires that becomes increasingly divided, fragile, and chaotic. So Daniel chapter 2 describes the final phase of human government as the iron mixed with clay. A divided kingdom that cannot stick together. The connection. Just as Daniel predicts the collapse and division of human political systems, Paul predicts the collapse and division of human religious systems. Both prophets show the right when the human institution reach their point of maximum division and weakness. A deceptive global leader. I can't get up. A deceptive a deceptive global leader, the Antichrist or the little horn in Daniel 7, rises. Oh, bad. I thought I heard it. He rises to falsely unite them all. So it says the biblical lens summary here, right? Here we go. So, the biblical lens summary. Okay. I was going to count it so I can stand up. Start sweating a little bit anyway. So, when you line these up side by side, the three books tell exactly the same story from different angles. Right? So, Daniel shows the political division and the rise of the fragile global power. Second Thessalonians shows the religious division and the spiritual falling away from the truth. And Revelation brings them together, showing the false religious systems, the woman, riding and supporting the final political empire, the beast. So, for students of prophecy, this is why looking at the current state of global religion isn't just a matter of history. It matches the exact steps the Bible says must happen before the final curtain rises. See, I keep trying to tell everybody, man. The whole time, the Bible has predicted everything. So then, I said, yeah, I would like to look closer at the iron mixed with clay prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 to see how it matches modern global fracturing, right? So, it said, the iron mixed with clay prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 is one of the most vivid descriptions of global fracturing in the entire Bible. It perfectly captures a world that tries to force itself into unity, but remains fundamentally broken, brittle, and divided. So in Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a massive statue representing a timeline of human empires. Here, let me get a drink of water. I'm so sorry. Goodness. Been talking for almost 40 minutes. So I'm trying to hurry this up because I really don't like them to go around. But it says, that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, King Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, right? Had a dream of a massive statue representing a timeline of human empires. The head is gold, Babylon, the chest is silver, Medo-Persia, and the belly is bronze, which is Greece. The legs of iron are Rome, and the timeline ends at the very bottom of the statue, the feet and toes made of iron and mixed with clay, right? So, the anatomy of the feet, Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 through 43. So, to see how this matches global fracturing, look at the exact words Daniel uses to interpret the dream of the king, right? He says a divided kingdom, Daniel chapter 2, verse 41. Daniel explicitly states that the kingdom shall be divided. I'll get you something to drink for a minute, okay? Okay? Yes, sir? Look at that. Look at that. It's good for me a few more minutes, okay? I'm almost done. Okay? Yes, sir? Thank you. Thank you, Lil. Thank you. Oh my goodness, I got my two children back here. All right, so trying to make this quick. I didn't even want to run over 40 minutes. So in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41, he talks about a divided kingdom. Daniel explicitly states the kingdom shall be divided. Its inheritance. It inherits the crushing military and institutional strength of the Roman leg iron. But it is mixed with fragile, brittle pottery clay, right? So partially strong, partially broken. Daniel chapter 2, verses 42. So as the toes of the feet were partially of iron and partially of clay, so the kingdom shall be the kingdom shall be partially strong and partially fragile, right? This perfectly describes the modern world stage. That we have massive, terrifying military superpowers, the iron, yet the global system is incredibly fragile and easily disrupted by economic crashes, regional wars, and political infighting, the clay. They will not adhere to one another, Daniel said in chapter 2, verse 43. It said they will mingle with the seed of man, but they will not adhere to one another, just as the iron does not mix with the clay. So how this matches modern global fracturing? Futurist prophecy scholars look at the iron mixed with clay as a flawless blueprint for our modern geopolitical reality in a few distinct ways. Okay, so the failure of globalism. For decades, world leaders have tried to force global unity through organizations like the United Nations, the European Union, and global economic treaties. They are trying to mingle the world together, yet just like the iron and clay, the nations cannot truly bond. We see this today in the sharp rise of intense nationalism, border walls, and trade wars and global alliances fracturing right down the middle. So the 10 toes alliances. Because the statue had 10 toes, prophecy students link this to the 10 horns of the beast in Revelation chapter 17. It predicts that the final version of human government will be a loose, unstable coalition of nations or global regions. It will have immense technology and military power, the iron, but zero actual cohesive or trust, which is the clay. The weakness of human systems. Clay represents humanity formed from the dust of the ground. When human pride, cultural divides, and competing religious beliefs like the ones we've discussed earlier, we are forced into a single global system. The foundation becomes brittle. It creates a world that looks imposing and unified on the outside, but ready to crack at any moment. So the ultimate end of the statue. The most important of Daniel chapter 2 prophecy is how the fractured kingdom ends. Daniel sees a stone cut out without human hands, slam into the statue, not at the head of gold or the legs of iron, but directly into the feet of iron and clay. The entire human system crumbles into dust and blows away, and that stone grows to fill the entire earth. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, he explains that in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And when you connect this back to my study of Matthew chapter 16, the picture becomes clear. Human institutions, denominations, and global empires are the unstable feet of iron and clay. They are fracturing right now because they cannot mix. But the stone, the bedrock truth that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, is the only kingdom that will stand forever. Dang, my bad. That's 4 hours. Goodness. Man, that one almost got that. Oh, shoot. All right. It says, the bedrock truth is that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. The Son of the living God. And is the only kingdom that will stand forever when the human statue collapses. Amen. So there's a lot more I want to go into about all this. But I don't know if we're going to do it tonight because, I mean, we still got a lot more to go. But, man, you wouldn't believe, dude. Yeah, we ain't gonna get the rest of this night. But hey, I appreciate everybody coming out. And we'll get on here and finish talking about this later on. I just wanted to, kind of go over this. It's been something heavy on my mind. I just want to say there are only one way to be saved, and that is through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. You know what I mean? Accepting this gift of salvation, that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son. And those who believe in him will not perish but have everlasting life. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it. He sent him to save it. So God bless y'all. I'll see y'all next time. I'm out of here. Peace.